Kellen Moore had his two quarterback frontrunners battling head-to-head and neither disappointed. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I want to tell you a little bit more about Devaughn Vele and the trade that brought him here to New Orleans, how he impacts the rest of the wide receiver room. We'll dive into that. We'll also take a look at the defensive line in New Orleans, which could be very, very good, actually. Like, it's been a standout thing for a little while now. And we're going to kick everything off with Kellen Moore doing something interesting in Wednesday's practice, having his two quarterbacks go head-to-head with one another-ish, and neither disappointed. We'll break it all down on today's show. We appreciate you very much, as always, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and get started planning your futures bets now. The New Orleans Saints did a really interesting thing. And look, this is something, well, let me just tell you what they did first. They did a really interesting thing. And I absolutely loved it. Let me be clear. I think this is a great idea by Kellen Moore and his New Orleans Saints coaching staff. So basically what they did was, after having Spencer Rattler get a team rep scripted with the first team, Tyler Shough get a team rep scripted with the first team, they then went into first team versus second team. So it gave the second team offense the opportunity to go up against the first team. Spencer Rattler was the quarterback in that situation. And then it gave the second team offense an opportunity to go up against the first team defense, with Tyler Shough leading the way on that second team offense. And then they went into a game situation where the second team and the first team were effectively teams. Second team was up by 7 points. The first team was starting with the football with the second team defense on the field. So again, it was first team offense versus second team defense. And this was a great drive by Spencer Rattler and the first team offense. Everybody there. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Brandon Cooks at wide receiver, Juwan Johnson at tight end, Alvin Kamara at running back, Eric McCoy at starting center. It was all there, right? And Spencer Rattler got the opportunity to go up and try to tie this game up with a touchdown, pushing down the field. He threw 8 straight passes, completed 6 straight passes on the way to crossing the 50-yard line, had an incomplete pass that was targeted for Rashid Shaheed that, I want to see, did it get broken up? No, it was just, it was broken up by Dallas Beanham, who played really, really well. Like, he has gotten better and better and better here over the course of this last little bit. He's had a really nice stretch here recently, but Dallas Beanham broke it up, and then he completed a touchdown down the right sideline to Chris Olave, which was just kind of on a 9 route, put the ball up, ended up getting over the inside shoulder to the outside hand. And with Dallas Beanham in really tight coverage, Chris Olave caught it with one hand in the end zone for a touchdown. It was actually 4 straight passes, 1 incomplete, and then 3 straight passes. My apologies, 3 straight completions. But excellent stuff there for that first team offense led by Spencer Rattler. And then Blake Grupe came out and kicked the extra point to tie it up effectively, 7-7 or whatever you want to go with, right? It was a 7-point difference. Now it was tied up. So then, instead of just like calling it and then giving Tyler Shough the opportunity to do the same thing on the other side, the Saints continued the game. The clock continued to run, and then Tyler Shough took over on a drive and then ended up going 3 of 5 loosely, because there was 1 incompletion that was wiped out by a penalty, and there was 1 completion that was wiped out by a penalty as well. So we're like 2 of 3, but had some offensive penalties that they had to overcome and then pick back up on. Had some, Ugo Amadi had a great pass breakup over the middle of the field at one point. Another offensive penalty to where they got to a second and really long situation. But then after Tyler Shough made one of the best throws that I've seen him make so far, he was working towards the left side of the field, got flushed out. I think the pressure was from Cam Jordan on the play, and he ended up getting to the outside. And as he was rushing towards that left sideline, he kind of tucked back, reset his hips, and then gave this really ridiculous arm angle throw right to the middle of the field, going back towards the middle of the field to a wide open Dante Pettis in the middle. And the reason why I stressed that he was wide open is because I think the inclination, which is the correct initial inclination to have, is that when a quarterback is working towards one side of the field, that throwing back to the middle of the field is typically dangerous. But in this scenario, I wouldn't call it dangerous because there was no one around Dante Pettis. And so that's the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to throw that pass because there wasn't anybody within 5 to 7 yards of Dante Pettis. And that ball got to him in a hurry. I mean, it was a phenomenal throw. Both of those throws were absolutely outstanding. And so he ended up hitting Dante Pettis over the middle of the field. Then you had a couple of defensive holding penalties after a sack by Brian Brzee that ended up putting the Saints in position to attempt a 58-yard field goal, at which time Charlie Smith knocked it through, and then that was the game winner. So 58 yards for a game winner there, and the Twos walk away with the win. But both of those quarterbacks, I thought, walked away with a win there. I think Spencer Rattler showed you the sort of efficiency with which he can work, the consistency with which he can work, picking apart that second team defense and moving the ball down the field, doing it a little bit more kind of meticulously as opposed to looking for the big play and then finding the big play when it presented itself, where, you know, they were just kind of in a hurry up situation, got up to the line, made the call, saw the one-on-one to Chris Olave down that right sideline and took advantage of that and placed that pass beautifully placed pass there. And an excellent job by Chris Olave to reel it in with one hand and did it with late hands as well. I mean, he caught that with one hand at the hip, basically. Like, he kept his hands down and then only made a move on the ball when it was absolutely necessary. Snatched away. Really, really good stuff. We were just talking about how kind of quiet Chris Olave's offseason has been. Don't expect his regular season to be quiet at all, especially when he's out here making plays like that. This is all taking place in the Superdome too, by the way. So they're tracking under the Superdome lights. They're getting sort of accustomed to, you know, that turf again and all this stuff. The new turf that's in, they replace the turf every year. And so all this is happening in the Superdome. And then Tyler Shough, I thought, led a good drive as well. At one point, he completed his first 2 passes, got one broken up by Ugo Amadi, and then ended up being able to get that ball out on the rollout, which ended up advancing them big time into situations where they were really digging a hole for a little while as an offense. Penalty, sack, all this other stuff. And then another penalty, but then being able to still get the ball up there with taking advantage of those defensive penalties and getting up there for the Charlie Smith field goal. I mean, absolutely outstanding. I think you can separate the two. You can say, like, hey, Spencer Rattler threw a touchdown pass. Tyler Shough got them into field goal range. That's a different situation. And long field goal range, I completely get all that. But, you know, as I've said before, I don't really deal with like the loyalism of the quarterback stuff. But for me, like, both of these quarterbacks had a job. And one of them needed to get a touchdown. The other one needed to get into field goal range. And both of them found a way to do that. And I think Spencer Rattler had a really strong day in his team drills. He was 18 of 21 for a touchdown, only 3 incompletions on the day. Tyler Shough, in the meanwhile, I clocked at either 6 and 12 or 5 and 11, depending upon how you count one of these. There was one that like could have been a sack, might have been a sack kind of thing. So in any case, either 6 of 12 or 5 of 11. So really excellent stuff from both of these quarterbacks when it came down to that drive. Obviously, the better overall day for Spencer Rattler numbers-wise, but I thought both of them were given an opportunity to go head-to-head and really, really leaned in on it, enjoyed the competition of it, and impressed. The both of them did. So really good stuff going into what'll be a quieter day on Thursday today at practice, and then, you know, the big stuff happening on Saturday's preseason game up against the Denver Broncos, where both of these quarterbacks will play, according to head coach Kellen Moore. Coming up next, let's jump over to the defensive side, and every standout being on that defensive line that could be really, really good this year. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. In August 26th, you're going to be ready for it because it is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For 24 hours only on August 26th, you're going to be able to get deals over on FanDuel for NFL season predictions. That could include who you're calling for MVP. Maybe you're crowning your Super Bowl champion early. Maybe you're picking your division winners. All of that will be available to you and more over at FanDuel. This is your moment. So if you want to take a flyer on the MVP race, like plus 1,000 when it comes to Jaden Daniels, pretty good one there. Or you want to take a look at that Super Bowl championship early, plus 850 for the Kansas City Chiefs. That's the one that I really like. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints defensive line could be one of its strongest units, if not the strongest unit, going into 2025. And it's been a long time since we've talked about the Saints defensive line in that regard. So for me, there's three strong possibilities of what's going on with the New Orleans Saints defensive line. Number one, the defensive line is going to be really good, and it's going to surprise pleasantly in 2025. Number two, the New Orleans Saints offensive line is struggling big time and is going to have a rough go during the 2025 season. Or number three, the offensive line and defensive line have gone up against each other so much that the veterans on the defensive line have begun to learn how to adequately beat the young guys, especially at tackle, on the offensive line, and that's what everybody's eating off of. So it's one of those three things, but I'm telling you, I am inclined to believe that the New Orleans Saints defensive line is going to be better than we thought going into 2025. I don't know if it's going to be the number one unit. I don't know if it's going to help the New Orleans Saints get to a playoff win. In fact, to a playoff appearance. In fact, I'm pretty confident in saying that it won't. But I am very confident that this New Orleans Saints defensive line is probably its strongest unit. From Chase Young and Carl Granderson on the outside, with guys like Cam Jordan, Fadil Diggs, as well as Jasheem Davis, Chris Rumph backing up that unit. We'll see how things continue to progress for Isaiah Foskey, who I made sure I gave credit to him after that Chargers game. His stop on 3rd and 14, forcing the punt, is what led to the 2-minute drive that tied up that game, led by that offense. So I got to give Isaiah Foskey some flowers on that moment. But beyond that, still some question marks there. So we'll see how things go. But then you add in the interior. Devaughn Vele, what a fantastic addition he has been for this team. He tackled somebody today on Wednesday during practice by simply grabbing them by the jersey neck, like the front, and just didn't let go. He just kind of held on to it. It was like, you're not going anywhere. I don't even know if that's legal. I don't know if the front is considered a horse collar or not, but the refs didn't throw flags. He just simply grabbed the guy that was running and said, no, you're not going anywhere anymore. Like, what an absolute display of power in that moment. But then you go beyond him and you look at guys like Bryan Bresee and Nathan Shepard, who have really risen to the occasion as 3-4 defensive ends. I have Bryan Bresee with a couple of sacks on Wednesday, pressure, all that. So I've seen a lot from those two guys. Nathan Shepard, Devaughn Vele, Bryan Bresee. Get ready for those to be your three interior starters. Those were the three guys that were given the day off during the second preseason game. That did not happen by accident, I believe. They traded away Colin Saunders, which has opened up the door for Christian Boyd, the second-year defensive tackle out of University of Northern Iowa, to step in and be that immediate backup at nose tackle. So he's somebody that's able to kind of help contribute and has been excellent here over the course of the past couple of weeks. He had that sack that was almost a safety in the first preseason game against the Chargers. In the second preseason game up against the Jags, he had 3 total pressures in that game and also had several tackles, or a few tackles as well, getting in on plays. And so those guys on the interior have also been really good. And you've got some rotational pieces that continue to grow there too. Vernon Broughton will continue to develop. Jonah Williams has been somebody that's looked really promising. And more. Like, there's a lot of other players that are going to be involved in these conversations, particularly on the defensive interior, where there were a lot of players that have been involved here. John Ridgway III right now dealing with injury, but another guy that can play nose tackle for you. Like, you get it. I think this New Orleans Saints defensive line can be very good going into 2025, or at least that's what the early signs are showing. And you'll note, I've not said that about any position group at all this offseason. I have not come on here and tried to sell you on any single one of these position groups whatsoever. I know I've talked about how the depth at linebacker looks really good and that it's been surprising, but I don't know what that means for 2025, because we have to see how Demario Davis and Pete Werner perform in the new defense before we can really say anything about what the linebacker unit is going to be able to do in 2025. And those guys have not played in preseason games, and they haven't had the moments that Chase Young and Carl Granderson have had, where there are times, and Wednesday was the most recent one, to where, like, I can flip through my notebook of notes from training camp practices and it's littered with 99, 96, 99, 96, 99, 96 all over the place. And then you'll see 90 in there. You'll see 94 getting some pressure, all that other stuff too. And so, I don't know, I'm pretty high on this. I was already high on Chase Young going into 2025 anyway. I've mentioned here on the show before that I think he's a double-digit sack guy in 2025, that he has the opportunity to finally see his potential unlocked here in New Orleans. But really just that entire unit has been really, really solid here all throughout training camp. And so I think there's a really good chance that that unit is better than we've seen in the past. And so maybe that means eclipsing 40 sacks for the first time in the last couple of years. But I think the other big thing, though, that we still have to find out is how effective they're going to be or ineffective they'll be against the run. The second unit for the New Orleans Saints, when they're out there in their entirety, has consistently struggled against the run against other teams. They struggled against the Chargers. They struggled against the Rams. They struggled against the Jags. And so I think that when we see this, it's easy to say, oh, well, the Saints run defense isn't going to be good anymore. But here's the thing. If your entire second unit defense is out on the field, your expectations are probably pretty low anyway. Something has gone horribly wrong in that situation. And so what I'm waiting to see is what the actual development of the starting unit, right? The rushing defense, which we have not seen on the field in its entirety yet. Guys like Chase Young haven't taken any preseason snaps so far. Devaughn Vele not been out there, so on and so forth. We have not gotten an opportunity to see that whatsoever. And so until we do, we don't really know. So that's the one big glaring thing that's still out there. And that kind of made me go like, okay, they could be one of the best units on the team because we have to see how they perform against the run. And we don't really know that until they get some solid game action. And I think if I'm the Saints, I'm willing to put them out there for at least a drive or two going up against Denver on Saturday. I guess it depends. Like if Denver's going to play starters, then there's value there for you. If they're not going to play starters, then maybe there's not value there for you. So we'll have to see how things go for Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos maybe. But I don't know. I think that there's value in getting those guys some early exposure just for a sec. Get them out there. Like get them off the field by get them out there is what I mean. Like get them off the field after they get their exposure and then bang, like get ready for week one. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty high on where this New Orleans Saints defensive line is. And I think I'm pretty high on where the Saints offensive line can be, but my question marks are still absolutely present there. I mean, Kelvin Banks Jr. has been awesome, right? No pressures allowed so far through those two preseason games. They've never had Eric McCoy out on the field, and you can see that when Eric McCoy is not on the field, they struggle with things like blitz diagnosis. Where's the pressure coming from? All those other pieces. That's all a thing that's got to get cleaned up. But I don't think that this is a symptom of the offensive line struggling and the defensive line succeeding off of that. I think the defensive line is just succeeding. And so we'll get a better idea of that when we actually see them in action. But I feel pretty strong that the Saints defensive line can be its best unit for this team. All right, coming up next, the New Orleans Saints traded for a big-bodied wide receiver, and it has a lot of ripple effects for some guys that might have been in line to make the roster at wide receiver who might not be looking at a roster spot anymore. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. You know, most people can't even name all their different financial accounts, what they do, what they mean, and most of all, what they're worth. We're talking 401ks, investments, finances sometimes, or not finances, properties sometimes. I mean, when you get all this stuff together and you don't have the ability to be able to get the full picture, you could end up leaving money on the table. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, an all-in-one personal finance destination and tool for you that brings all of your financial life together in one clean and easy to use interface on your laptop or on your phone. I've been using Monarch Money for some time now. Helped me get rid of some of the old subscriptions that I was still paying for, helped me track some of my budgeting and spending, and helped me cull everything down to one app as well, where I can track all of my finances. So don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com on your browser to get half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. After the acquisition and trade with the Denver Broncos to land big-bodied wide receiver Devaughn Vele, the New Orleans Saints wide receiver room is about to see a major shakeup, because make no mistake about it, when you trade away a fourth-round pick, the guy you trade the fourth-round pick away for, he's making your roster. All right, it's happening. And especially when you fit such a big need, like what the New Orleans Saints desperately need in their wide receiver room, up until this trade for Vele, the New Orleans Saints have not had a single wide receiver over 6'2" on their 90-man roster 1 second this season. They had a couple of guys that came and tried out. They tried out Justin Ross. I knew that was never going to come to fruition. They tried out a couple of other guys and everything, but Devaughn Vele is the guy when it comes to the big-bodied wide receiver prototype that the Saints so desperately need. And because the Saints added him and the process by which they went to add him, right? The expense that they took on to do so, I think that it makes the making of the roster for a couple of other guys that might have been shoo-ins or might have been considered shoo-ins at some point during this offseason makes it a lot less likely that they make the roster all of a sudden. I'm going to start with wide receiver Cedric Wilson Jr. Wide receiver Cedric Wilson Jr. is probably the one guy that is most negatively impacted at wide receiver by the acquisition of Vele. He does not check the big-bodied wide receiver style, but he does play very physically. He's an outstanding blocker, and he can be used as a big slot weapon at 6'1", 6'1", just under 200 pounds. Like he's listed at like 197. And so he gave you a couple of the things, not all of them, but he gave you a couple of the things that you would want with a bigger bodied player. And so when there wasn't a bigger bodied player present on the roster, Cedric Wilson Jr. was the guy that felt most likely to contribute in those roles. And especially with his connection and comfortability already with Kellen Moore, he and Kellen Moore, of course, overlapping during their time in Dallas. And so for Cedric Wilson Jr., who the potential's there, the idea of what he can do in the slot is there. You've seen it before, all that, but the production and the proven nature of it, not necessarily there yet, right? That's fair to say. And so this guy that comes in, Vele, he played 69.5% of his snaps out of the slot last year in Sean Payton's offense. That's a big slot guy. And so all of a sudden now he comes in with the capability and experience to do one of the things that separated Cedric Wilson Jr. from the rest of the pack. And he does it with a bigger body and with surer hands, having caught 75.9% of his passes during the season last year in 2024. Another guy that ends up getting pushed a little bit is Dante Pettis. Now, Dante Pettis, if he made the roster, or even still makes the roster, because he still has a path to it, unlike Cedric Wilson Jr., Dante Pettis has the special teams path, because he could be a returner for this team. Now, he could also be a practice squad guy that gets elevated to help being a returner every now and then, but this kind of makes that now more likely than him making the roster. I initially had Dante Pettis on my 53-man projection, the one that I did before the first preseason game. We'll do an updated one here later on in the week. And I guess by later on in the week, I mean tomorrow, because tomorrow is the last day. We have Friday, and then the game is on Saturday. So yeah, I guess we'll do it on Friday. Don't judge me. And so Dante Pettis made my roster because of that. But now you have to look at the additional value that comes with a player like a Devaughn Vele, who can play all these different roles, who can run routes pretty well, who's got good speed, 4.47, who's got, a good frame, reliable hands, contested catch guy. It's going to be hard to keep that off the roster. And oh, by the way, they spent a 4th-round pick to get him, right? So that ends up having a big impact on Dante Pettis as well. And then guys like Kevin Austin Jr. and Donovan Peoples-Jones just haven't really shown enough yet. Kevin Austin Jr. has shown more than Donovan Peoples-Jones. Kevin Austin Jr. has become an absolute slant mechanic. He is excellent in that space, but on those in-breaking routes, that's kind of where his game has stood out the most so far throughout training camp. And so is that enough when you don't contribute on special teams, all this other stuff? And so I think that ends up putting Vele ahead of him as well. And Donovan Peoples-Jones, so interesting, was phenomenal at Michigan, had a couple good years over in Cleveland, had the time that he spent away from the league getting clean and doing everything that he needed to do, going on his sobriety journey, all the other stuff, and then coming back to the league. There were high hopes there, but they didn't even put him on the field in the second preseason game. And he played barely 10 snaps in the first preseason game. And so it's clear that Donovan Peoples-Jones, if he makes the roster, he makes it through the practice squad. And then the Saints could potentially elevate him and try him out at a later time. But that's pretty much as far as that goes. And so Vele comes in and immediately has a spot right there along with Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Brandon Cooks, Mason Tipton, Devaughn Vele. He's right there. He slots right in. No pun intended. He can also play in the slot. And so that's kind of the way that I see it as well. And I also wanted to share this. I thought this was awesome. We did a live episode last night after the trade. So if you haven't caught that, make sure you go back and check that out, because that is a little bit about the kind of a more in-depth breakdown of everything that went on. And a guy, Gelato Boy is his YouTube name, so I do want to give him a shout out. But he contributed a little bit here, saying that as a Denver Broncos fan, right, self-proclaimed, he says, as a Denver Broncos fan, he said that Vele is genuinely a solid, reliable player with great hands, good speed, and route running. Absolute steal in the 7th round. Could have been a 3rd rounder, but there was concern over his age. Said high football IQ, fun to watch. Referenced him as Sean Payton's Thomas, who I assume he means Michael Thomas. I disagree with that, but certainly Marquez Callaway is the other one that he listed on the Broncos. Underrated talent, sad to see him go. Take care of him. So a good sort of sign of faith there from a Denver Broncos fan that took the time to come here to Locked On Saints to shed a little bit of light on how he feels about the departure of Vele and how he could help the New Orleans Saints. It's clear that this guy can have a pretty good impact for New Orleans. Doesn't have to be a top flight number 1 wide receiver, but if he can come in and help to contribute where the New Orleans Saints need help the most, could be a big time acquisition for New Orleans. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, 53-man roster projection, and we'll get you everything that you need to know ahead of Saturday's game against the Denver Broncos. Make sure you check us out over the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. And of course, we'll see you here tomorrow. And of course, don't forget to also check out the rest of our Locked On Louisiana shows, Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison, as well as Locked On LSU with Matt Moscona. Go and check them out today as well. We appreciate you very much as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.